Welcome to Now We're Getting Somewhere. I'm Katie, and I'm a certified life coach, but I've also been a management consultant at McKinsey and a product manager at a tech startup. In other words, I know what it feels like to have a life that looks pretty good on paper, but doesn't feel as good as I want it to. I help my professional clients develop lives that are more meaningful, happy, and also more successful. And I want to share the same practical insights with you. Let's go. Hey, everybody. It is my rest week, which is when most of these podcasts get written. And today I wanted to share with you my favorite new practice. I discovered it maybe a month ago on a day when I was feeling pretty discouraged and frustrated with myself and kind of turned around. Like, where do I even go from here? And how do I begin to pull myself out of this moment? And this is a moment when typically in my life, I would often journal. Journaling in general has been such a useful tool for me to comfort myself and get insights about what I'm actually feeling and wanting and decide how to proceed. But at this exact moment, I couldn't journal. I was literally about to hop in the car for about half an hour. And then I had an appointment for about an hour. And then I had to drive home for another half hour. And then I was going to have to go into a bunch of other elements for my day. And I was feeling pretty vulnerable and upset in that moment. So I wanted to find some way to support myself. So that was kind of the immediate context. But the more general context, if I'm being honest, is that I've also been feeling a little journaling fatigued recently. I mean, please don't get me wrong. I love journaling or doing morning pages, if you want to call it that. Those practices have genuinely changed my life in the past 13 or so years that I've been doing it regularly. But I've been noticing myself sometimes just not in the mood to journal and kind of craving something different that would still give me a lot of the benefits. So I wasn't feeling great, about to hop in the car. I thought about calling a friend or my mom in the car, but that also didn't feel quite right. I wanted some empathy, but I also wanted some reframing. And honestly, I kind of wanted to figure out my next steps. And my friends or my mom or whatever, they are so wonderful, but they probably weren't going to move around the furniture in kind of the exact way that I was craving in that moment. So I kind of out of desperation, figured out this new practice on that car ride. And oh my gosh, it helped me so much. It helped me feel less discouraged, helped me find possibility, helped me figure out my game plan for next steps. And I have been doing it a lot, actually, ever since. And then I had a couple of clients in the last week. We were talking about practices that would help them with some of the challenges they were in. And I found myself recommending what I've been doing. I think what I literally actually told them was, there's this thing that I've been doing. It's a little dorky, but it's really been helping me. And each time after I told them that, they were like, oh, that seems like a great idea. I can't believe I've never thought of that before. So it felt like, given that had happened with a couple separate clients recently, it felt like it was time for me to stick this in a podcast for all of you. So for the rest of this podcast, I'm just going to share, what the heck this practice is that I'm referring to, the different ways that I use it, and what it helps me with. And then I'll also share a few reasons that I recommended it to some of my clients as well. I hope you get a chance to try this and that it helps you as much as it's helped me. Okay, so first, here's the practice. At a high level, the practice is really just having a conversation with myself via audio recordings. And that helps me sort through confusion, get encouragement and insight. But there's some specifics about this practice that really move the needle on it for me. So I hope you'll stick with me as I kind of get into the weeds a bit more of it. So when I do this practice, I imagine myself as having at least two parts. One part of me is what I'm going to call, for purposes of this podcast, my confused part. I don't actually use the word confused part when I'm talking to myself. I just call myself Katie, or sometimes I call myself best friend. I'm going to talk more about that later. But I'll use that term, confused part in this conversation, so it's just easier for you to follow. So there's this one part of me, as I said, that is confused or lost or overwhelmed or just kind of in need of a pep talk. That's one part. And then there's another part of me that is sort of on the other end of the spectrum. That's the part of me that's able to give that insight or encouragement or pep talk. I'm going to call that my wise part for purposes of this discussion. But again, I don't really use terms like that when I'm doing this exercise with myself. I think that would feel a little too formal for what this practice really is for me. So basically to start, I just open up my voice memo app. That's what I use to make audio recordings because I have my phone with me and my phone has a voice memo app. And I record something from that confused part. I'll just open up the voice memo app and record whatever feels true. So I'll say, oh my gosh, I'm feeling like such a mess. I feel like I totally messed up everything today, or whatever else is on my mind or my heart. And then I'll just list everything that I think is going wrong right now. Like, I'm frustrated with this, and I messed up that, or whatever. Sometimes it's one thing, sometimes it's 10. Doesn't have to be fancy or particularly organized because nobody's going to hear it but me. So I make that recording. I will say I try not to go on for too long. I'll max out at maybe a couple minutes because the way this is going to work is there are going to be a bunch of back and forth. So I find if any one recording is too long, it's like too much to respond to in the next round. And I like to make the conversational chunks a little shorter, but you can obviously do whatever pleases you. This is for you. But I kind of channel that confused or overwhelmed part. I make the recording, and then, and I think this is a really important part, I listen to that recording I just made. I listen to all of my whining and all of my fears and all of my discouragement and anxiety. The listening to the recording part for me is the part that really makes this practice work for me. There's something about listening to all of my feelings, like when I'm saying it out loud, when I'm just saying it out loud the first time, it just feels so fused with me that I don't immediately have any insights. I don't really know how to proceed. I just stay in that lost or confused place. But when I listen to it, when I pause and then I press play and I listen to it, it seems to trigger that part of me that does know how to advise or comfort or problem solve with another person. It triggers that part of me that does have some wisdom to share. And to be clear, the quote unquote wisdom that I have usually on this first pass, it's almost never the final insight. I don't know what the final insight is going to be at this point, but I do know some things that would be useful to say for this first pass. And for the record, just as pulling behind the curtain, as someone who coaches for a living, this is also what happens in my client sessions. I don't know where we're going to end up on the first pass. I just know something I could say to kick us off. So it's not shocking to me that even with myself, I don't know the final thing to say. I just start us off. But if you are listening to this and thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know what I would say to myself, even to kick things off, first of all, I would challenge you just to try it, because most of my clients, even if they feel really lost and confused about their own struggle or problems, if we reframe it into, what would you advise a friend in this same situation, they usually actually have very good intuitions. Their empathy gets triggered. They know something to say that would be useful. And again, there's something about like listening to your own recording that for me helps to trigger that part of myself that knows what to say to someone else. So the first thing I would say is I actually think you probably will have ideas, but just to give you some examples of the kinds of things I say to myself, because I've kind of been paying attention to, the kinds of things I've been saying in preparation for writing this podcast. I realized that my first pass back to myself will usually have one of maybe three elements. The first one is there's often a lot of just validating my own feelings. Oh my gosh, of course, this is so hard. It makes so much sense you feel upset about this because this is really upsetting. So there's some, validating. The second thing, and this is probably the most common thing I do, is that I tend to almost uniformly invite myself to focus on what is going well. Because if I am feeling negative about my productivity or my eating or my energy or my friendships, I will usually be overly focused on the negative. And it's helpful to remind myself of everything that is going well. I will literally list it. I'll make a list. I'll be like, this is going well and you did this well and you're improving on this and this is going so much better than it used to. And there's usually a lot of things that are going well, because my brain, at least, and I know many other folks' brains, tend to, default to like at least low-level negativity on a more regular basis. And then things can get really negative if I'm feeling quite upset about something. So as a personal example, I literally did this practice just this morning because I was frustrated that I didn't kick off my Monday morning quite how I hoped I would. And I wasn't as productive as I hoped to be. And I got a little distracted and all these things. And then I did this and I reminded myself of everything that I did well this morning and also everything that I've been doing well lately in general. And from that place of less negativity, from a more balanced brain, I immediately felt more motivated to work, more motivated to make choices that would serve me better. So just the reframing and the reminding myself of what's going well, it's really useful for my brain. And then the third thing um, that I will sometimes do in this first pass or, sometime in the early parts of this conversation will be to sometimes just try to understand the problem better. Like sometimes there's something bothering us, but we don't really understand everything about it. So sometimes the wise part of us might just ask questions to be like, wait, is it this that's bothering you? And to get a reaction from that confused part, or like make guesses about what upsets you. Like, oh, is it this that's upsetting you? So you can, again, get that reaction from the confused part and eventually figure out what the problem really is. So just to bring us back to the high level of this. So I've made a recording from my confused part. I've listened to the recording from my confused part, and then I make a new recording. I just, press the record button on my voice memo thing from the wise part of me. And then I listen to that recording too. And once again, the listening is where the magic happens for me. There's something about listening to it that separates me from it and helps those insights kind of land or marinate within me deeper than if I just even say it out loud to myself. Like I have to hear myself saying it. I do not know 100% why this is true. It just seems to be true for me. So I've recorded something and then listened to it from my confused part. I've recorded something and listened to it from my wise part. And then I do it again. I reconnect with that confused or upset or down part of myself. And I make another recording where I share how I feel in reaction to all of that. So usually I'll say something like, okay, it felt really good for you to tell me X and Y, but honestly, I'm still feeling really upset about A and B. Just honest. I don't have to act like it fixed everything if it didn't, because usually it doesn't fix everything. And then I listen to that recording, and then I make another recording from that wise part of me with another set of insights or encouragement or ideas or whatever it might be. And then I listen to that recording too. And I just go back and forth in this way, kind of having a conversation with myself, dividing myself up into two parts using sort of these voice memos so I can listen to it each time. And it's a very human process. Like sometimes certain issues get resolved, and then as I feel into it, I will literally scan my body and feel for tightness or anything that feels stuck or weird in there, see what emotions might be tied to some of those stuck or weird sensations. Then I'll share a new thing that I've been holding on to that now takes some space to breathe. I'll resolve my productivity feelings, and then I'll be like, but now I'm feeling upset about friendship, or now I'm feeling upset about motherhood. And then I'll resolve some of that, and then we'll jump back to productivity. I don't have any problem with saying to myself, you know what, self, these are great insights, and it does land, but here's the thing that is just bothering me again. I don't expect myself to resolve anything perfectly or on any particular time frame. And just to give you all the insights of how I do it, sometimes the parts of myself don't stay perfectly in their roles. Like this part we're calling the confused part will start having insights, and then the wise part will start kind of complaining or naming problems. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect. It's not like a play or a screenplay that I'm writing to be shared with an audience. It's just me talking to me in a loving and supportive way. So all that is fine by me. And sometimes over the course of this, I will sense that I'm ready to problem solve or explore next steps. Usually that's not in the beginning, but eventually after a couple of back and forths, I will be. And to be clear, sometimes the next steps are just like, what am I going to do in the next hour? Or what do I want to do today? It's not always very grand. But sometimes I am not sure what those next steps should be. I'm genuinely confused. So sometimes I'll throw out a suggestion as this kind of wise part of myself. And then the confused part will just knock it down and be like, no, I don't like that. Or no, it won't work. And then we'll have a couple back and forth. And sometimes the solution ends up being, let's just let this flow through you. Let's let this play out and see, what happens. And then we're going to kind of pick ourselves back up tomorrow or in 2 hours or whatever you feel able. I just want to share that because I think sometimes when we think about problem solving, you might be thinking to yourself, oh, well, Katie's a coach, so of course she knows the right thing to say. Of course she knows exactly how to problem solve. And honestly, often, again, it might be a little messy, or I genuinely don't know what to do at first. But if I keep talking to myself, if I keep comforting myself and encouraging myself and reframing my initial negativity into a more balanced narrative and exploring possibilities and then understanding why those possibilities won't work, and then, also exploring why my second round of possibilities won't work, I find that eventually I come to next steps that I feel at peace with. And overall, as I've said, I have found that I typically feel just a ton better personally after doing this, often, quite frankly, kind of shockingly better. And I think part of that is that I do know what I need and I do know what I want to hear. Honestly, on some level, better than anyone else. I know when I need empathy versus I know when I need problem solving, and really embracing my own ability to comfort myself, not to eliminate the importance of talking to folks I love or talking to professionals, but just as another tool in my toolkit. That has felt really empowering lately. So to summarize, that's the practice. I imagine myself as having two parts, and I have this conversation between those two parts using voice memos, and I listen to each voice memo before I record a new one. The listening part, as I said, has felt really essential to me. It helps me kind of separate myself from myself and access a genuine kind of wisdom. I have done this practice at home. I've done it in the car, quite a lot in the car, and I even do it on walks if I'm in my neighborhood taking a walk. It's not super crowded on walks in my neighborhood, so I just talk a little quietly, and I'm sure it looks to other people like I'm just talking on the phone on a walk, which I and many other people in my neighborhood do quite frequently. I do wear headphones when I do it, so it's not like anyone can hear me listening to my own voice memo, which might be weird, but yeah, I even do it on walks. So that's my overview of the practice. Now, I just wanted to share a couple case studies of situations in which I recommended it to clients in case any of those apply to you. And then I'm just going to share 2 more quick notes about this practice, and then we'll call it a day. So first, a couple of client examples of recent clients who I've recommended this practice to. One recent client I recommend this practice to was someone who doesn't love journaling, but often struggles to know what he wants. Like something will happen at work or in his personal life, and he'll have a bunch of conflicting feelings and not know easily how he wants to proceed, or even just like how he feels or what he wants. This, by the way, is so common, especially with folks who find their way to me. So I had suggested, and then he had tried journaling as a really useful tool to help him kind of sort through all these thoughts and feelings. And it did help, but he just didn't love journaling. Some of my clients are just not journalers, and that's okay with me. He did find that talking to other people in his life helped a lot, but you don't always have other people to talk to at every single second of your day. And also, even people you love can sometimes be variable in how useful they are to talk to when you're feeling vulnerable. Like sometimes, they're a little impatient with your feelings, or they have an agenda or a preference, so they're not fully neutral as they're kind of like listening carefully for what you might want. So I suggested this practice to him as like a journaling alternative that he could do at any time, even when there was no one else around. And it seemed to really resonate. And then I had another client last week who does like journaling, but she can get a little precious with her journaling. Like she can try to just write things out just the right way. And we were talking about some tools that she could use in the future to kind of figure out what she wanted and what she wanted to do going forward. And I suggested this practice, again, as another tool for her toolbox. And it also seemed to really resonate. She seemed to really like the idea that she could kind of just record a voice memo and like let it all hang out, not need to get everything quite so right. And even for me, I mentioned at the beginning, I've done daily or almost daily journaling for like 13 years or so now. I've noticed in the past year or two, especially, that I'm just not always in the mood to journal. Like I've been feeling a little journaling fatigued recently, even though journaling is a practice that has always been so helpful for me. So I think that this practice feels like it's both similar and also a little different from journaling. Like I do feel like I get a lot of the benefit from journaling, but it feels kind of nicely different. So if you're not into journaling, or you're a little journaling fatigued, or you're a little journaling perfectionist, I think it might help you too. Okay, so 2 more final notes, and then I'll call it a day on this podcast. First, just a note about the practice. I want to be really, explicit and honest that I don't imagine that I have invented something radically new with this practice. Practices of this kind where you divide yourself up into parts and then you connect with those different parts to use your inner knowing to come to some kind of path forward. Obviously, those have long existed in the therapy world and the coaching world in so many different forms. To my understanding, there's literally something in the therapy world called, I think it's called like the 2-chair process, where you sit in one chair and you channel a certain part of yourself, and then you sit in the other chair and you channel a different part of yourself. So, these have existed in some form, of course. But for me, as someone who, is decently aware of the self-growth and self-development world for quite some time, I've never heard of or thought of doing it in exactly this way. Something about speaking it, but also recording it and listening to it just really, really worked for me. One thing that I know is that if something works for me, it usually works for other folks too. So that's really sort of my motivation for sharing it. So that's the first thing. And then the second and really last thing I wanted to share is something a little silly but important. I just wanted to share what I call myself. Since, like I said, I don't use words like wise self or confused self when I'm actually doing this. Those don't really resonate with me, though you can use them if they resonate with you. I had this idea for a little while when I was doing this that I might call myself beloved. It felt like something that Janine Roth or Mary Oliver might do, but I tried it. I'd be like, hello, beloved. And it just felt a little cringy. Like I just couldn't do it. But I did somewhere along the way start calling myself best friend. I'll be like, hey, best friend, how you doing today? And I'll be like, oh, best friend, I'm just feeling so down. And sometimes I've had situations where, after a bunch of back and forths, eventually the conversation just becomes me telling me how glad I am to have myself as my own best friend. I don't know, maybe this is embarrassing, but I literally teared up like a week or two ago talking to myself about how glad I was to have myself as a best friend. I kind of wanted to share that, even though it's embarrassing to share that. Is that dorky? I mean, on some level, my earnestness may be a little dorky, but that hasn't ever stopped me before, so it's not going to stop me now. But I wanted to share it because that has been another kind of surprising gift that I have felt from this practice. I've kind of felt not alone in a really deep way sometimes when I do it. On a sort of more vulnerable personal note, I've realized that some of my deepest fears are about feeling alone. Like, oh my gosh, my husband will die before me and I'll feel lonely. Or, my mom most likely will die before me and then I'll feel really lonely and I'll miss her. And I mean, those are such common, understandable fears. And they do on some level come down to, being afraid of being alone and lonely. And even beyond those kind of deep, vulnerable fears, I know a couple of different adult women who have best friends. Like they have another woman in their life who they would describe as their best friend. And I've always felt a little envious of that. Like that sounds so nice. So while I do still have a personal goal of finding a best friend, it has been really nice to decide that on some level, I'm also my own best friend. And I can literally talk to myself saying, hey, best friend, because I'm always going to have myself as my best friend. It was just knitted in me. Yeah, I'm just always going to have me. So I call myself best friend when I do this. And I will also tell myself that I love myself. I wanted to mention it because I know for me, I love getting little specific ideas like this. So it's an idea if you'd like to do that too. And whatever you call yourself, I hope that this practice helps you as much as it has helped me. Till next time, everyone. If you really want to change in a meaningful, lasting way, that's when you need a life coach. Every client I've worked with has had incredibly personalized reasons why they're in the tired or anxious or stuck or uninspired state they're in. Working with me can help you identify those roadblocks, which are usually blind spots that you genuinely cannot see, and implement a profoundly customized, doable plan for overcoming them. I have a very small, high-end, one-on-one coaching practice. If you'd like to be my next client, reach out at katiesiever.com. I'd love to meet you.